we walked home from the bus that day. It had been like raining and it was rainy. My mom came home and she's like, Mallory, where's Chase? We start looking around the neighborhood and she's like, Mallory, your dad wants you back at your house. And my dad comes up to me and he's crying and he goes, Mallory, they found Chase. Chase is dead. That night, just like the absence of someone in your family felt super heavy. It just felt like this pit. And it was so like painful that you could physically feel it in your chest.
This is the Lost Child podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. We have a guest with us here today, and she's going to share a little bit about her story. Let's dive into the podcast. Thank you, Mallory, very much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us. This one will be a little bit different. All the ones in the past have always been with a child. This is your brother. So can you give us your brother's name who passed away?
Yeah, his name is Chase Kurtzborn.
Awesome. And where did he fall in relation to you?
He's my older brother. He's 2 years older than me. He's like, when I was younger, he was like my idol, basically. Like I looked up to him. I don't know if you guys have noticed this with like Sonny and Tucker, but the second child, like, I don't know, as a second child, I had a tendency to look up to Chase. He was my big brother. Like I just wanted to be exactly like him. So
what was Chase? Oh, sorry.
As a little kid, what were some of those things that you wanted to be just like him?
I loved how much he liked Pokemon and like the fun, like nerd kind of stuff. So I would do Pokemon with him. We both got like Nintendo 3DSs and would play all the time together. As I got older, like he's like really smart and I always tried to be smarter than him. So like we would bicker sometimes, but I would always like try to pull out some really smart points and be smarter than him. He was also a really kind and like serving person. He just did what he was asked. And he was always nice to other people. That was one thing that I didn't necessarily try to be like him with, but I think more he impacted me in that way, as in seeing him be that way and growing up with him that way. It made me have a desire just to be like that, just to be kinder towards other people as he was.
Yeah.
What are some other things about Chase? What did he like to do?
Oh man, he was a nerd. He loved Star Wars. I remember there were times when we were younger we used to watch the Clone Wars TV series together. Mm-hmm. I have like some very vivid memories of us in the basement in one of our New Jersey houses, just watching Clone Wars together. We used to play Legos all the time too. I had a lot of stuff that he had, so I didn't have like Barbies or anything. I had like Legos. I played with like remote control cars with him and everything. But I remember we used to play like Legos together all the time, and I loved the Ahsoka Tano Lego set and everything. As I got older, I wasn't like huge into Star Wars until after he died, and then I like went back and rewatched everything, and like I love Star Wars now. I see why he liked it so much. But yeah, he liked Star Wars, like Pokemon. I just remember we played like Legos so much. We really liked to wrestle with each other, with like me, Chase, and Clark did. I remember we used to like stuff pillows up our shirts and we would like sumo wrestle each other. And whenever we weren't doing that, like the boys liked to roughhouse, and I didn't want to like get in the middle of it if there weren't pillows involved. So whenever Chase and Clark were wrestling, I had one of those like plastic microphone things that you can get from the dollar store. Yeah. And I remember whenever they were wrestling, I would like pull my parents' ottoman over next to them, and I would stand on top of it, and I would be an announcer.
You'd announce
I would call out every move that they were doing.
So you had a pretty good relationship with Chase.
Yeah.
An interesting thing there on the Clone Wars stuff, that was one of your dad's favorite memories of Chase, was watching Clone Wars with him.
Yeah, I loved watching Clone Wars with him. I remember when the last season of Clone Wars came out, he was like so excited to watch it. It came out a few months before he died, but I wish I had been like more interested in Star Wars then. But I remember he and my dad like they would talk about it like they were so excited. The final season's coming out. And they like, I remember when the first episode got released, they like sat down on the couch together and it was like this whole big deal for them. I didn't watch it with them. Like I would watch a couple episodes here and there, but I wasn't like super interested.
Did you see his personality shift over time? Since you were a sibling, you were around him a lot, and also you have a different perspective than a parent would have had. Did you see his personality shift as he was getting older?
I feel like, yeah, I did. As I feel like he was like the same older brother to me all the way up until he got into high school. His freshman year, I kind of noticed he got like more isolated. I don't know if that's the right word. He just liked to be by himself more often. And even then, like as a freshman, one of my favorite memories is when I was in 8th grade and he was a freshman. Like after our whole family went to bed and everything, I liked to stay up and read books. I also got that from him. He liked to read books, and that I thought that was cool. So I read books all the time. But so I would like stay up and he would too. And there were times when it would be like 11:30 at night and he would just come in my room and we would just talk. Like he would talk about high school and I'd talk about 8th grade. But once I got into high school, like when you get into high school, I don't know, I just became kind of like a brat. And so me and him, we weren't like super close his sophomore year and my freshman year of high school. But like, it's kind of like that separate but together thing. Like we did high school together, and like it's like this mental bond you have with someone rather than like I don't know how to explain it. Like we would walk home together from the school bus, like we rode to school together, but we wouldn't really like talk to each other all the time, but we like had an understanding for each other. And we still had like a really strong relationship, even though we weren't like super tight. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely had siblings too, and that I went to high school with, and even siblings that were a decent amount older than me. And even those siblings, it was just an interesting relationship that they had, even at school. Some of it is like, it's not cool to be this person's friend type of thing. And like my little sister, and it just becomes this kind of weird dynamic at high school a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But yet you still have this relationship that's been built on years of trust and doing things together, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly how it is. I remember he liked to work out a lot, so he was like pretty strong, pretty built. My friends, especially my guy friends when I was a freshman, would tell me that they were like scared of him and stuff, which is really funny. But I was like, yeah, that's a good thing. So
this one will be a little bit not different than others. This episode's dealing with suicide. Yeah. And what I want from you is, can you take us through kind of where you were at that day, how everything transpired to you, not necessarily what everything happened to him, because I want kind of your perspective of where you were at from a sibling. How old were you at, or how old were you when everything took place? How old were you?
I was 14.
So you're 14. So you were 14, and just kind of take us through that whole day of how everything happened from your perspective.
Yeah. I remember that day, it was like super rainy. A few weeks ago, I found a picture of, I took a picture of the sky the night before it happened. And it was like this super cloudy, like red, like you could tell it's been raining, but it was like a red sky. It was really cool. But I remember when we walked home from the bus that day, because we used to walk home all the time together. It had been like raining and it was rainy. I thought the sidewalk looked cool, so I took a picture of that too. And Chase loved the rain. We used to live in Pennsylvania, so that was just kind of like a little side note. But remember we got home, and something that like we always did when we got home is Chase liked to watch the news. So he would always turn the news on and sit down and watch it when we got home from school. Sometimes we would watch YouTube together. There was a YouTube channel we liked. I forgot what it was called, but that day he turned on the news, and I didn't want to watch the news that day. So I turned on, I forget which one it was. I turned on a Marvel movie, and I put my headphones in, and I had like a heated blanket, and I was just like on the couch with a heated blanket, and he was watching the news. And because I was like watching my own little movie, I wasn't really paying attention to him. And also like, I didn't think about like, why would I be paying attention to my brother? Like that kind of stuff.
That's definitely a thought that comes after everything transpired, right? That's something that you were like, man, like it becomes one of the cycles of grief, or one of the stages of grief of like, what could I have done differently type of thing. So we don't necessarily need to get into that yet, right? And we can get into that later. But one, that's a completely natural feeling to have, right? Everyone goes through it, even people that were friends or even family members that are removed, even one or two people from Chase, they go through that same thing. Why didn't I give him a phone call that day? Why? Like everyone questions those things, right? It's part of the way that we grieve and we think about and process through what happened. Yeah. So you're sitting there on the couch watching your Marvel movie with your heated blanket on.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm just watching my movie, and like out of the peripherals of my vision, like in the moment I wasn't paying attention, but like remembering it, like my subconscious was, I guess. He would like get up and go do something and then come back, and then get up and go do something and then come back. And looking back on it, I know what he was doing, but then I didn't. And
it was just you two at home?
It was just us two at home. Natalie and Jason lived next door to us.
And they're
my aunt and uncle, on my mom's side. And so Natalie, my aunt, had to go pick up her kids from the bus. I was like still just on my phone, but I noticed Chase had like gone outside. Natalie said that he was just standing on the front porch looking at the rain and everything, but then he came back inside. And then I remember he went into our little butler's pantry and like grabbed a key. And I was just sitting there still watching my show. And he said, "Mallory, I'm going to go get the mail." And then he left. And so I didn't realize how much time had gone by, but my mom came home from picking up Clark, my younger brother, from school. And she's like, "Mallory, where's Chase?" And I was like, "Oh, he went to go get the mail." And my mom was like, "He's been texting me. I told him not to go get the mail. I wanted him to wait till I got home." And so we were like a little confused, and we found his phone at home. He like had left his phone home. And so we're like looking for him. We can't find him anywhere in the house. We start looking around the neighborhood. I remember Clark had gone off to go look for him, and Jason and Natalie and all of their kids were like involved at this point because we didn't know where he was. And I remember my mom had asked if we wanted to say a prayer together. Sorry.
It's fine. And then we have Kleenexes everywhere if you want Kleenexes too.
Yeah, I'll definitely use some of that. And that was like the first time that I had ever really seen my mom like scared. And it was new to me because I was a 14-year-old kid. I was like, this is my mom. Like, I've never seen my mom so like scared before. And my mom doesn't ever cry, and she started to cry. So that scared me a little more. And so when I tried to say the prayer, I couldn't do it because I started to cry too. I was scared. So she said a prayer that we would find him. And I remember after that prayer, I went and started reading my scriptures. And I haven't been able to find this scripture again. But I remember I read a scripture. And it said something about how the sheep will return to their king. And in that moment, I thought that it was like God's promise that Chase would come back to us. But, sorry, guys.
You're totally fine. It's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast. Can you tell me what the scripture was about again?
The scripture, I remember it was in Alma, and I remember that the scripture had said something along the lines of, the sheep will return to their king.
Yeah.
It was probably talking about Ammon bringing the sheep back to King Lamoni, but in the moment, I had thought that meant that God was promising he would bring Chase back to us. He would come back home. But looking back on it now, I know it means that Chase returned to God, his king. And so after reading that scripture, I was like, okay, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be great. And so all of us had decided to go out and look for Chase. So my uncle Jason was driving around the neighborhood looking for him. The rest of my family was too. My dad hadn't come home from work yet. I was with my cousin Callie, and we were going down our street, knocking on the doors of everyone that had a Ring camera or a video camera in their entryway, just asking them if they'd seen him. And nobody had, and my mom eventually got the police involved. She tried to file a missing person report, but they said they couldn't do that for 24 hours after the person had gone missing. I don't know how everything worked out, but the police ended up coming and helping us. And my dad had come home by this point of all of us looking and getting the police involved. And I remember that Callie had gone back to our house for something, and I just kept looking, kept knocking on people's doors, hoping that someone would have seen him. And she comes back and she's like, Mallory, your dad wants you back at your house. And I remember coming home and seeing my mom, dad, Clark just crying. And my dad comes up to me and he's crying and he goes, Mallory, they found Chase. And he just gave me the biggest hug, and he said, Chase is dead. And I remember that day we just from that moment on we just sorry, give me just a second. I remember after that, we just sat in our family room the rest of the day. I don't know, time. I don't know where time went, but time was just completely gone. So many people came to see us. I I took my contacts out that later after that because I'd been crying so much and it was starting to hurt my eyes. And I didn't feel like seeing anyone. And so I just remember there were so many people in our house, but I didn't know who anyone was. But it was it didn't matter who was at our house or who it was, or how many people were there. I just remember I was sitting on sorry, guys.
Totally
There's
fine.
no need to be sorry. This is a completely normal and natural thing. It's an awful thing that you went through.
Yeah.
And to find out the way that you did and to help with the process of trying to find him, there's no need to be sorry. If anything, we're sorry that you ever had to go through this.
Yeah. Thank you. I sat in I sat in his spot on the couch. He had a spot. We all had our own little spot on the couch, and I remember I just sat in his spot on the couch the entire night. And the rest of my family just like sat on the floor right around me. My dad was pretty good at going up and thanking the people that came to see us and comfort us. And I remember when it happened, there was we were really close friends with some people across the street. Their last names were the Smiths, and me and Chase babysat their two little kids, Tristan and Shay, and they were really cute little kids. And we were super close with their family. Their family came over and just kind of spent the entire night with us, along with Jason and Natalie's family. Jason and Natalie were like grieving with us because that was their nephew and cousin. But the Smiths came over, and their little girl, Shay, she was the sweetest little girl ever. She gave me a hug, and it was like the most comforting hug ever from this little girl, which was really interesting because I didn't think that, I don't remember how old she was, like 8 or 9. I didn't think that this little girl would be comforting like a 14-year-old. But that night, once everyone had gone home and everything, just like the absence of someone in your family felt super heavy. And it was so like, it just felt like this pit. And it was so like painful that you could physically feel it in your chest. And I remember all of us were too scared to sleep alone that night. So me and Clark and my mom and dad all piled into my mom and dad's bed, and we couldn't sleep that night, but that's where we spent the night until the next morning came.
So sorry.
Thank you. You guys probably know just what that feels like too. The physical pain after losing someone. I don't know, did Tucker and Dieter like spend the night with you guys too?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
First couple nights.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, it was a few weeks before me and Clark finally went back to sleeping in our own beds. I remember my room was all the way across the house. On the other end of the house, I had like my own bathroom and bedroom. But after he died, I hated being over there by myself. And so once we finally went to like go through his stuff and keep what we wanted and donate to people and donate the rest to people in need, once his room was empty, I moved into his room because I didn't want to be down there by myself anymore. I just remember it was really nice to move back down by the rest of the family.
Was it hard to move into his room?
At first it was. It felt kind of weird. My mom was trying to have me set up my room in a similar way that his was set up, and I was like super against that. I was like, nope, I do not want that. I don't want my bed in the same place his was. I don't want my desk in the same place his was. So it felt like my own room. Like the first few days it was weird, but after that it felt like my own room. I remember I took like a picture of what his room looked like before I moved into it. And then I took like a picture of what my room looked like after I'd put everything in there. This is kind of like a before and after.
Yeah.
And also to kind of keep the memory of what his room looked like when he was still here.
What were you feeling and thinking like the weeks to months afterwards?
Everything just felt kind of numb. I don't remember. So COVID happened. COVID shut down the world the same day he died. And to everyone, COVID was like such a big deal. It was like this huge pandemic that shut down the world, and it was so terrible to them. But it didn't, like, to me, it was nothing. Like, COVID had hardly crossed, like, our minds at all. Everything was just so numb. It was so weird to think about someone that had been with you your whole life and then was just, like, gone. I remember a couple of days after, we got to go to the temple before it closed. Like the day before it closed, which was a tender mercy. I remember I just tried to get every little piece of him that I could. I downloaded all his music from off his phone onto my phone. All of the pictures he had. I remember I would like scroll through our text messages. We played Game Pigeon a lot together. He helped me get really good at it, which was really fun. But
what is that?
Oh, it's this it's a game on your phone where you can send little mini games through text message to other people.
Nice.
Yeah, that was fun, but after he had passed and everything, I just remember it felt really numb. I'm kind of glad that COVID shut down the world because it gave us the opportunity to be with each other as a family. It was nice to have Jason and Natalie and cousins next door because they really helped us cope. We did a lot of activities together. And it kind of helped the numbness of everything go away, spending time with them.
How long do you think it lasted, the numbness, and does it ever come back?
Yeah, the numbness lasted for a while. I don't remember when it stopped feeling numb. It lasted for a while. It went away eventually, but it was replaced with like sadness, I guess, but I feel like I would rather feel the sadness than feel numb. I want to say around his first birthday without him is when I started truly feeling like sad that he wasn't with us anymore. It would be like 6 months afterwards, I guess. After you hit that first year mark of after they die, things get a lot easier. At least for me, they did. It still hurt a lot, but it stopped feeling numb and it became more of a reality. I got to the acceptance point in my stage of grief about a year after he had passed. And you go through the stages of grief again. At least I did. About a couple years afterwards, I went through all of them again.
A lot of psychologists like to refer to it as a cycle. So it goes in a circle, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go from one stage to the next stage but it's that you can kind of ping around the circle and you're potentially like in that circle for the remainder of your life.
Yeah.
You can get to an acceptance point, but then there's times that you go back to any of the other ones that are in there, the denial, the anger, bargaining, even like we talked about it before, even you sharing the experience of what you were doing when you got home from school, you were watching your Marvel movie, and in your mind, you're like, I don't know why I wasn't paying attention to him. I should have been paying attention to him. But that's an after the fact. That's a bargaining stage of grief of, I wish I would have done this, or God, if I did this, or if I do this, could we bring him back? Or could I have changed that outcome this way? Right. And so even there's potential for the rest of your life that there's times that you're going to like enter back into some of those, get super angry because this happened to you. Start wishing you would have done something different. You know, it could even be 20 years down the road and you still end up back in some of those stages or cycles of grief. Yeah.
Did you experience? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Wait.
I was just going to ask, did you experience anger then?
Yeah.
Who were you mad at?
Anger. I was mad at Chase there were a couple days where I was angry at God, and I was like angry at myself for feeling angry at God because it felt wrong. Like I shouldn't be angry at God for this. And so instead I turned that anger towards Chase. I was like, why would he leave? Like, Chase, why did you leave us? Like, how could you like do this to us? Like, couldn't he see how much pain we were all in? So I was really angry at him for a while. My stage of anger was really short. I was never one to like really get angry easily or stay angry for a while. And it quickly transitioned into the stage of depression. And I was in that stage for a long time.
Hey, Lost Child Podcast family, if you love what we're doing here and want to support us, we started a Patreon account. It's a platform where you can sign up for a monthly subscription to help support our podcast. In the video description, you can find a link to our Patreon account. For as little as $10 a month, you can help support the Lost Child Podcast to help share these stories with the world. So please help support the podcast and help support us by visiting the link in that video description. We thank you. Now, back to the podcast. Was it a conscious effort that you made to try to get out of that anger? Did you do something, or did it just, like you, in your words, you said it kind of evolved or it just transitioned into depression?
It just kind of transitioned into depression. I remember seeing my dad and my mom, they were angry at God for a long time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't feel angry at God because it felt wrong. And because I knew that he had a plan in the whole situation. And I couldn't stay angry at Chase because I loved him and I missed him. And I knew that after he had gone, he was feeling the peace and happiness that he couldn't feel in this life. So I couldn't stay angry at him.
Had you noticed that he was having any kind of a hard time, or no? He was like hiding it well.
He was hiding it pretty well, I guess. Either that or he just turned it into his personality. But I remember there were a few times when my parents would like sit down and talk to him because he'd been super sad or super like not mopey, but emotional. Mm-hmm. Like just, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like, another question to kind of follow up on that, is it because I know emo has that's like a thing, at least when I was in high school, definitely came out, or like goth, just like almost a persona that somebody could take on, and that's like how they identified or who they wanted to be around or the group or clique that they wanted to be with. Had you seen any type of transition into that? Not saying that all emo people are like prone for suicide or anything like that. That's not at all what I'm saying, but just any avenue there that as a sibling, you saw some type of transition in his personality and the way he acted.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was a slow transition, but I definitely noticed one, after he had gotten into high school. My mom had kind of, not necessarily blamed it on some of the people he was hanging out with, but she thought that like the people he was hanging out with were making him so moody and just like grumpy and like making him want to isolate himself all the time. And I remember that like he would sit down and talk to my parents. My parents would sit him down and talk to him about it. Be like, why are you so sad all the time? Like, what's going on? Like looking back on it, obviously, like it seemed like there was something not wrong with him, but that he was like doing it. I don't know how it seemed, but my parents were confused as to why he was just acting moody all the time. And I remember they had another one with him a couple days before he passed. And I remember me and Clark had gone into our rooms because we were like, we don't want to be a part of this conversation. And but we could still hear them and everything. And I just remember that like they were upset at him because he was so moody. And I remember that their conversation had gone pretty bad, like they were fighting and everything. And I remember, like, I think this is where I really started to realize that he was like not okay. And I had a thought, like, listening to them argue, I was like, man, Chase, please don't kill yourself for this. Like I had a thought that was like, you could commit suicide over this. And in my brain, I was like, no, Mallory, you're being irrational. You're just being paranoid. But I do remember having that thought. And that was one thing that I was like, well, maybe that was like a prompting or something. I could have listened to it, but that's going back to what could I have done differently?
Yeah. Even going down that same road, I'm curious, when your mom came home on that day, Ryan was like, hey, Mallory, where's Chase at? At what point in that process did it turn to he could possibly be gone forever? Because it seems like there would be at least at the beginning, you're like, oh, he might have went and hiked the hill, or he's out in the desert somewhere, or he went to some friend's house but didn't want to take his phone. Like, there's all these things you could be thinking where he could be. Yeah. Was there a point where it became like, oh my gosh, I'm potentially trying to search for my brother who could be dead?
Yeah. We originally thought he had gone over to a friend's house to like try drugs or something, but I don't remember at what point it switched to that. I remember at some point looking for him by knocking on people's doors and asking if they had caught footage of where he went. I kind of deep down knew that he was gone, but I didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
And I guess that was kind of where the denial part of the grieving process started before I found out. I was just in denial, like, no, he's going to come back. Like, he's going to come back. Like, we're going to find him. But I guess deep down, I like already knew. Looking back at that moment, I didn't really think ahead to see, like, little 14-year-old me didn't think that he would have come back from that. Like, I just didn't foresee us really finding him and him coming back.
When your dad had told you that he was gone, were you like in disbelief, or what were you thinking when he told you that?
I just remember, like, I said no. Like, I was so sad. I was just like, no. And I, like, crying. I was like, no, like, it can't be, like, no. But it was like I knew, but I was also like, I was devastated. I was just like overcome with sadness and missing him. And it was just this immediate, I felt like a hole in my life when my dad told me he was dead, not when we were searching for him, even though I feel like I like knew that he wasn't going to come back. It was when my dad had officially told me they found him, he's dead, that I had truly felt like that emptiness, that hole, that weight on my chest.
Like that pit, that
pit in your heart.
And you had told us that you had transitioned into somewhat of a sadness, depression type of thing. What were some of the things that you did during that depression to kind of just help you with where you were at? Take us through that little journey.
Did you just like let yourself be depressed, or did you try to get out of it, or what?
I tried to get out of it. I tried to avoid the feelings as much as I could. I never spent time alone. I was always doing something with the cousins.
Did you talk to your parents about how you felt, or release that or talk to anyone else about how you were specifically feeling?
No, I didn't really talk to anyone about it. Neither did Clark. Me and Clark we just like bottled everything. We avoided feeling everything. My parents had started going to counseling, and I remember they, like, every time they went, they would try to convince us to come with them. And I remember there was one time we went with them, and I interacted with the counselor a little bit. Clark didn't really interact with him at all. Both of us weren't really interested in talking about it. We were more so of the mindset distracting ourselves. So me, Clark, and our cousins Colson and Callie would spend time together like all the time. Like we would live at each other's houses basically. So we just distracted ourselves in that way. And I honestly don't remember a time when I was alone during that period of time, or when me and Clark and Colson or Callie were without each other. We would have sleepovers all the time. I remember that after a while, after I had bottled those feelings for so long, I was ready to just kind of let them go. And so I started being more open about them. I started talking about them more.
Who did you talk with?
My parents, my mom and my dad mostly.
How did you start that conversation? Because let's say that there's a kid that's in the exact same spot that you're in, right?
Yeah.
That is like, I'm bottling this up and I can feel it. And I know that I just need to, like, how did you go and initiate that conversation the first time with your parents?
Well, the first time with my parents, it was kind of easy for me to start that with my parents, because before I had started that with my parents, one of my young women's leaders, Sister Butler, she had lost her brother a few years before that. And so she was the first person that I'd opened up to about that. Because she understood from my perspective, because she had also lost a brother, I felt like I could really talk to her and open up to her about that. And from there is when I felt more comfortable talking to my parents about it. I don't remember how our first conversation went, but I remember my mom or my dad, they used to like bring up a little something, like they would say a little something about Chase. And then like you could like feel a little bit of their sadness. And then because I had been talking to Sister Butler about some of those feelings, it felt more natural and more comfortable for me to talk about those feelings with my parents after they would share a little bit of theirs. Like my dad would say something like, "Oh, I remember when we did that with Chase. Man, I miss him." And before I had started talking about it, I would have just been like, "Yeah, me too," and like moved on. But afterwards, I would be like, "Yeah, I miss him too. I remember this and this." And I would start to talk about like how much I missed him, more of my memories of him. It just became easier to talk about him and what had happened after I had made that connection with somebody who had an understanding for what I was going through in a different way.
Do you know about how long it took you after the fact to be able to talk to your parents?
It was a while. I want to say probably around the 1 year mark of when he had died is when I was really able to feel like I could open up about it.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part in your household, was it kind of a let's not talk about it? Or were like your parents super open and provided opportunities to have you talk about it? Or did it just become this, we don't really want to talk about Chase?
It was kind of an interesting situation because we were all going through the grieving process differently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For Clark, it was let's not talk about Chase at all. He just didn't want to talk about it. My dad really wanted to talk about it. My dad's a very emotional person. And so he just wanted to talk about it all the time and talk about how much he missed Chase and his guilt with Chase being gone. And my mom was angry for a long time. Specifically, she was just in the anger stage for a long time. And so I remember anytime she talked about it, like she always had like this hint of like anger behind whenever she would talk about it. And I don't really remember where I was at that stage. I was kind of because I was depressed for so long, I think I was just sad about it all the time. And so I would talk about it a little bit, but not too much. I remember there were times when I felt like our conversation about it would get going too long. And so I would change the subject, just to kind of avoid it. But
Once you started releasing some of those, right? Your terminology, you had bottled it up and you were ready to release it. Once you started to release it, how did that help you? How did it impact you?
Yeah, once I started to release all of those feelings and emotions, it helped me further process, because keeping those feelings inside, I felt like I was just thinking about those over and over again, just the feelings of, I miss him, he's gone, why would he do this? But once I released those, my brain was able to move on to, how is he feeling now that he's gone? I know that he's happier now. I know that this is a part of a plan. I know that everything's going to be okay. I still miss him. And I still had some anger, like, why would he do this? Or guilt towards myself, like, why wasn't I paying attention? Why didn't I just show him that I love him more? But along with that, I had the thoughts of, everything's going to be okay. Like, this happened for a reason. Like, the acceptance started to come easier once I started talking about my feelings with what had been going on.
So you had mentioned that you did a lot of things with your cousins, like as a way of coping, kind of just kept yourself distracted, and then how you talked with your parents. Is there anything else that you did? You only went to the therapist once. Mm-hmm. Did you ever go to therapy again by yourself?
I did, actually. About a couple years after, about 2.5 years after, I kind of went through that depression stage again. And it was pretty bad. Like, I started having my own suicidal thoughts during that stage of depression. And I hated that. So I started, going to therapy. And I only did about a month of therapy, because he just kind of helped me retrain my thought process to an optimistic viewpoint rather than just being sad and depressed all the time.
He gave you some tools to use for the rest of your life, as opposed to like go to a chiropractor and they like crack your back and you're good to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
He gave you some tools.
He gave me some tools on how to think about things in a better light. What was the original question again?
What were some of the other things that you did to help you cope? Because originally you coped with distraction and also just support from your cousins, talking to your parents. You went to this therapist. So is there any other things that you did that you thought helped or continues to help you cope with this?
Yeah. At the time, some things I did to help me cope was to find ways to express myself. So I got into art and music. I didn't get very far in music, but I like to play the guitar still. So that was just like a new skill that kind of helped me. And then learning how to do art. I remember that I did a watercolor of Chase and I gave it to my mom for Mother's Day. But just kind of like going through that, like being more okay with drawing him, painting him. It was a really helpful tool to help me cope, because it helped me realize that I still love him, even though he's gone. He chose to leave. And it also just helped me to kind of be okay with where I was at. I don't know. It was nice to express myself in that way, other than just talking.
Did you go to an actual art class? Did you just look up YouTube videos, or like, what did you do to learn more about art and to get you in that kind of art place? The reason why I have the question again is if somebody's in your spot, you're like, hey, that seems like something I would want to try. Yeah. What did you actually do to get involved in art and learning more about it?
I self-taught. I did a lot of YouTube videos. Just kind of looked up techniques on how to do something. I'd like never drawn a person before. So I kind of like traced the picture first and then like sketched it out, added like, I just did YouTube videos on how to do stuff. And because it was like during COVID time, so it was hard to find lessons for anything. School was out, so I couldn't do an art class. So I just self-taught, by doing YouTube. My dad is pretty good at art, and so he kind of inspired me to progress towards that, and I liked it. something else I did to cope was surrounding myself with good friends, and being okay with talking about it too. I remember my sophomore year, I was very okay with talking about Chase and everything that had happened. And my friends were very aware of what had happened. And I think they were more uncomfortable with me talking about it than I was, which is something I had realized and something I was quickly okay with, because I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable, but I was so happy in the fact that I was comfortable with talking about it openly to anybody. And it had taken me a while to get to that point of being willing and ready and totally okay with talking about it openly to anyone. But through that, I realized that not a lot of people are comfortable talking about that, specifically because it was a suicide.
Yeah.
It made them very uncomfortable.
Do you feel like it made your relationships with those friends more difficult, or were you guys were still okay?
I feel like it made our relationship kind of stronger because they still asked about it. They still asked, and so I would tell them like how I was feeling, some of the things that would happen. Most often it was they just didn't know what to say about it or how to feel about it because they didn't really understand. I had a couple of friends that could understand, and they understood really well, even though they had never experienced anything like that. And that helped strengthen my relationship with those friends specifically. And it also helps me too, because I felt like somebody had truly cared about what I was going through and what I was feeling and what I had been through without them having experienced anything like it.
What about your relationship or your relationships with your family? Because I know you have a lot of family around here. Do you feel like it's made your relationship stronger with all of them as well?
Yeah, it definitely has. We've always been like a close family, but after he had died and everything, I feel like everyone in our family was going through the grieving process, because we all loved him so much, of course, but it was different. I just remember seeing emotions from certain people in my family that had never expressed emotions like that before. And people in our family being particularly understanding towards us and just offering up so much love for us. We're all like so close with each other now, that we can all live in the same household and be totally okay with each other.
Yeah.
In what ways, I'm just interested in your perspective, because what your parents have gone through what you've gone through is pretty awful too. But from your perspective, how has Chase's death impacted your parents?
It's definitely impacted them differently because that's their child. Like, I can never understand losing a child versus losing a sibling, because they raised him. Like, that's their child. They've raised him to be who he is. They helped him grow. They've nurtured him ever since he was born, and they have an unconditional love for him. Obviously, I have an unconditional love for him too, but I saw him more as a big brother that I want to be just like, or even better than. But seeing them go through that process, it was harder for them to get to the stage of acceptance, because he was their child and he chose to leave all of us. I remember we had some friends that there were times we would all go out to dinner together and we would talk about it. And my mom would always, for a really long time, would always ask the question, why? Why did he leave? And she still asks that question. And we've all come to accept that we won't know the answer of why he left. But something I remember from one of those times that we went to dinner with those friends is that they would try to comfort her and just offer her some condolences and try to explain things to her, like why it happened, that we don't know why it happened, to trust in God and trust in the plan. And I remember that I had gotten to the point where I was able to express some of that, express the feelings of, Mom, I don't know why he did this. I don't know why he left. We won't know why he left for a long time. But he's happy where he is now. He's doing the Lord's work. And he is where the Lord needed him to be. And I just remember that was a very big realization for me. The friends that we were with were really impressed that I had said that. They were like, she's very wise. She said something that like they weren't expecting me to say that. And I wasn't expecting myself to say that either. I hadn't known how far I had gone in the grieving process to be able to get to that point. But I do remember that my mom for a while just couldn't understand why. And then my dad for a while felt guilt. He just felt like it was his fault. And I remember I would also explain to him that it wasn't his fault. But I felt kind of like a hypocrite because I also felt guilt. Like I felt like it was my fault at the same time. But I like in my head, it couldn't be my dad's fault. So,
do you feel like your parents changed how they parented you and Clark afterwards?
Yes, definitely. One thing I realized, and something that they've talked about too, is prepare rather than protect. That was like my dad's philosophy after Chase had died and everything. I've seen my parents as really close friends to me more than like, I see them as a parental figure because they're my parents, but like I have a friendship with them stronger than a parent and child relationship. They became more like my closest friends rather than parents that I feel like are trying to just control what I'm doing, which when I was 14 and before he had died, I was kind of like that. Like they just want to control what I'm doing. Like I don't have any freedom, but after he died, they became not necessarily more relaxed, but more understanding that me and Clark have our own opinions and feelings and that we need to experience things. Even if we're making a mistake, that it's okay for us to experience things. And they would also prepare us for things rather than protect us, as in keep us from things. So, I don't really have an example, but instead of like keeping us from doing something, they would tell us how to go through something the right way. They would prepare us for a situation rather than keep us from a situation.
Yeah. Instead of putting you in a bubble and being like,
yeah,
you can't ever experience any of this stuff. Hey, you're probably going to experience some of these things. These are some of the outcomes. These are some of the potential ways that you could go through these experiences. Yeah, I like that. Preparation instead of protection. Yeah. One thing from a parent standpoint that I'm just curious of is seeing how Chase's death impacted your parents. Did it impact how you interact with them? As an example, did it make it so that you didn't want to say certain things or talk about Chase in a way because you could see how much hurt it would bring them? I asked that because I've seen that from even my own kids where they're like, well, I didn't want to tell you that because I could see that would make you sad or something like that.
Yeah.
Did any of that happen where you're like, oh, I don't want to say this or don't want to do that because I can see how much they are struggling with the fact that Chase died?
Yeah. I definitely felt like there were times when I was protecting my parents' emotions, specifically with like stuff that I felt or stuff that I discussed with like another family member, or maybe something that someone in our family wanted to go do with us. I felt like there were times where I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, or hey, maybe we shouldn't go do that because it would make my parents feel sad, or maybe we shouldn't talk about this as a family together because it would bring back emotions for my parents in this way. And so I kind of felt like I was very aware of how they felt. And I always tried to keep an optimistic point of view, which is very hard to do in a situation like this. And it wasn't like optimistic, but something recently, because we just, what's the right term? Like, not his anniversary of death. Like,
Yeah.
it had just come
His
up.
death date.
His death date.
Another person on this podcast, they call it the Angel Day.
The Angel Day.
I thought it was a wonderful terminology that they said, that it's their Angel Day.
Yeah. So on Chase's Angel Day, I remember that like we were all sad and everything, and I don't remember what conversation I had with my mom, but I had a conversation with my mom, and I just remember that towards the end of it, I was like, well, look at it this way. It's just 1 year closer to being able to see him again. And it's just kind of like little stuff like that I would try to focus on, because even though it's really sad, one thing that going to counseling helped me with was, instead of looking at those sad emotions and sad thoughts that are coming up, how can you make it a positive one? How can you think about it positively? And so something that me and my mom have is, we have so many years before we can see him again. It's going to be so long before we can see him again. And, I remembered that, and I was like, oh, how about we look at it this way? We're just 1 year closer to being able to see him again.
Just frame it in a different light. Yeah. I might not put this in, just a thought that came to me right now, is having Chase, your brother, die, has it impacted any desire that you have to have children in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I want to have a lot of kids in the future. Something that my mom told me is that when my mom was pregnant with me, it was really hard for her. It was a hard pregnancy. She almost lost me in the pregnancy, and it got very dangerous for her in the pregnancy too. And so they were going to be done just after me, but they decided to have Clark too. And just looking on that, something that came up after he had died was they were glad that they had 3 kids, because if they hadn't had Clark and Chase had died, I would have been all alone. And seeing that, I definitely want to have a lot of kids, because although I don't like to think about it this way, there's a possibility that I could lose one of my kids. Is it likely? I don't know. Probably not, but it could happen, just like it happened to my brother. And if something like that were to happen, I would still want my kids to have their other siblings there with them, just like I still have Clark. And we're a very close family. I still have all my cousins and everything too, but just having another sibling there for you to understand what you're going through is a blessing that I didn't think I would get to know.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would want us to know, or anyone that maybe is in your situation? As an example, if you were trying to give Tucker or Dieter some advice on the fact that Sonny is now dead, their sibling, is there anything else that you would want to just share with us?
For Tucker and Dieter, I would want them to know that Sonny is still looking after them. She's always around them still. She cares about them a lot. Still, I know that. That's one thing I've come to realize with Chase is, in the little things, he's still there. It was a blessing for me to know that, specifically when I got my patriarchal blessing, Chase was there with me. When I opened my mission call, I know that Chase was there with me. So even though it feels like she's gone and she's far away, she still misses them both, and she misses you guys too. And she's still watching after you guys. Something I've missed is being able to experience things with Chase. And I often think about the times when the two of us would just talk, like the times when he would come in my room super late at night and we would just talk about stuff. And I miss that. And I always think about how I would want to talk to him. Like, I just want to talk to Chase. I just want to tell him everything that's happened in my life so far. But one thing I know is that he already knows. Even though he already knows, I still want to tell him, but he already knows everything that's going on in my life because he still cares and he still wants to be there with us, even though we can't be there with him. And I know the same is for Sunny too. So.
Did you ever try to talk to Chase? Like actually out loud? Or in your mind?
Yeah, I actually have. I remember there was one time in class we had an assignment to write a letter to someone who's our hero. And I wrote a letter to Chase. And I know that he's read it too. And I know there have been times when I'll go and visit his grave and I'll like talk out loud to him. Tell him how much I miss him. And I know that I've felt him tell me that he loves me and he misses me too. I often pray that I'll have the experiences to be able to hear Chase because I know that he can hear me. And I've had those experiences where I've been able to feel him and hear him around me. It's really nice to, I guess, still try to form a relationship with him, even though he's not physically here. He's still here. And I still can have and form a relationship with him, even though it's very different than what it was when he was here.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and share your story. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for giving them the opportunity to come and do this with you guys.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. And remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.